The torches came first, not the romantic kind, not the soft candlelight of modern paintings, but smoking wedding torches carried through narrow streets, throwing moving shadows across plaster walls. A Roman bride walked beneath them in a bright veil, her hair split with ritual precision, her dress bound tight at the waist. Behind her came laughter, chanting, and the kind of jokes that only sound harmless if you're not the one being led forward. Ahead was the door of her new home, and behind that door was the part of the ceremony Rome rarely described in a clean voice, because the Roman wedding did not end with vows. It ended with a handover, a transfer of body, household, and legal identity, staged so publicly that refusal became almost impossible. The Romans had a name for the procession that delivered a bride to her husband's house: deductio in domum mariti, the taking of the bride into the husband's home. It was supposed to be joyful, it was supposed to be sacred, but built into it were rituals that treated reluctance as an expected performance, that turned embarrassment into entertainment, and that framed the wedding night as something the bride was meant to endure whether she wanted it or not. This is the lost Roman ceremony that turned wedding nights into pure cruelty, not always with overt violence, more often with something colder: social force, a wedding as a public inspection. Roman marriage was personal, but it was never private. A wedding was a community event because marriage created legitimate households, legitimate heirs, and legitimate transfers of wealth. The bride was displayed. The neighbourhood watched. The household gods of the new home were waiting. The entire ritual made the bride visible so the community could recognise what was happening. Scholars of Roman ritual have noted how central the procession was, placing the bride in public and drawing the community into the event. That public focus matters, because it shaped what the bride could safely do. A woman who hesitated too much could be mocked. A woman who resisted could be framed as disorderly. A woman who tried to flee could be physically carried and still have the ritual interpreted as correct. And Rome, as always, had a story ready to justify it. The threshold, where reluctance became tradition. When the bride reached the doorway, she was not meant to walk in normally. Plutarch, writing about Roman customs, asks why the Romans do not allow the bride to cross the threshold by herself, and instead lift her over it. His explanation is chilling in its calmness. The act was understood as a symbol of unwillingness, a ritual echo of abduction. The bride is carried as if she is being taken by force, as if she is reluctant to enter the house where her virginity will be lost, or reluctant to abandon her family. Rome turned the idea of consent into theatre. The bride was supposed to look like she did not want what was about to happen. That reluctance was treated as propriety. Enthusiasm could be read as shamelessness. So the ritual asked her to perform fear, or at least to perform hesitation, while everyone watched. If you want a ceremony that can twist into cruelty, start with one that normalizes the image of the bride being taken. The spear in the hair. Before the procession, the bride's body was prepared for its new role. Her hair was arranged into a traditional style, and in some accounts it was parted with the point of a spear. Plutarch asks this too: why part the hair of brides with a spear point? He offers interpretations that reveal the culture underneath. It may symbolize that the first Roman marriages began in violence and war, or it may teach the bride that she's now joined to brave, warlike men and should accept a plain and unsoftened form of beautification. That is Rome in miniature, a wedding ritual that quietly reminds the bride what kind of world she's entering. A world where male violence is not a threat to marriage, but part of its mythology. The belt, the knot, the bed. Then there is the belt. Roman writers and later commentators describe a bridal girdle tied in a complicated knot associated with Hercules, a knot intended to be untied by the husband in the marriage bed. On paper, this looks symbolic: a fertility charm, a bond, a ritualized transition. In lived reality, it is a ceremony that places a physical act of access into the husband's hands. The knot is not untied by the bride, it is untied to her. Rome loved symbols that disguised power as tradition. The bride's body is framed as a threshold itself, something to be opened correctly, something to be managed by ritual. And when a society treats marital access as expected, the line between consummation and coercion becomes easy to blur, especially for very young brides, arranged matches, and unions where the woman's position in the household is weak. The cruelty is not only what happens, it is the certainty that something must happen. The songs that made shame a form of entertainment. During the procession, Romans sometimes sang lewd wedding songs, the kind that mocked and teased, often in obscenity. These ribald verses were a known feature of some Roman celebrations. This matters because the bride is not only being transferred, she's being publicly sexualized in front of neighbors and relatives, with ritual permission. The crowd laughs, the torches flicker, the jokes land like stones. Even if the intent is to ward off evil or bring fertility, the effect can still be humiliation. The bride is pushed into an adult role with a chorus reminding her that her body is now public property in a new sense. A ceremony can be sacred and cruel at the same time. Rome excelled at that, the legal shadow behind the ritual. For many Romans, marriage was not just love, it was law. In older forms of Roman marriage, a wife could come into manus, literally into the hand of her husband, meaning she came under his legal control, or that of his paterfamilias. Later, sine manu marriage became common, where the woman remained under her father's authority rather than her husband's. But the wedding rituals lingered, even as legal structures shifted. The symbols often outlived the paperwork, and symbols shape behaviour. A bride carried over the threshold like a captive, hair parted with a spear, a knot that the husband unties in bed, lewd songs that make her shame communal. Even if the law allowed nuance, the ritual taught a simpler lesson. This is not your night. This is the household's night, where the cruelty lived. When people imagine cruelty, they imagine screaming. Rome's wedding night cruelty often lived somewhere quieter. It lived in expectation. A young girl married to a man chosen by her family. A political match, a financial match, a match to connect households. The bride is expected to comply because everyone is watching and everyone is invested in the outcome. The rituals are designed to move her forward, step by step, until resistance feels like sacrilege. The Romans even embedded the idea of forced entry into their explanations of the threshold ritual. Plutarch explicitly frames the carrying as symbolic of unwillingness, tied to the bride being brought in involuntarily. That should change how you read the scene. The bride is not always resisting in reality, but the culture wants her to look like she might be. Because Rome preferred a woman who submits over a woman who chooses, and that preference is where cruelty breeds, the ceremony that refused to die. The Romans did not invent every part of this. Many societies have rituals that imitate capture or reluctance. Many cultures have jokes and teasing. Many have public processions. What makes Rome distinctive is the way it tied those rituals to the myths it told itself about marriage and conquest. Plutarch links bridal customs to the violent origins of Rome, the first wives taken by force. So the wedding night is not only personal, it becomes political memory, a reenactment of domination. That is why the ceremony survived. It was useful. It trained women to accept that power enters the home the way armies enter cities. Not by asking or by crossing the threshold. Final reflection. The lost Roman ceremony is not one single act. It is a chain of acts that build a world where the bride's reluctance is expected, where the community participates in her humiliation, where the groom is cast as the one who opens, unties, carries, and claims. Rome did not need to describe wedding night cruelty in graphic detail. It built the cruelty into the architecture of the ritual. A society that turns unwillingness into tradition does not have to force every bride. It only has to make refusal feel impossible. Comment below with your insight. Which part of the Roman ritual feels most unsettling? The threshold carry, the spear in the hair, the lewd songs, the knot on the belt, or the public pressure that made the wedding night feel inevitable? Because sometimes the most brutal ceremonies are the ones that still look like celebration. This is Hidden by Time.